Hey guys, as I mentioned in the first video, the first thing we're going to be doing, the first thing we're going to be talking about is planning out your novel. There are so many ways you can do this. There's so many different structures you can use. This is just one method, a beat sheet. It's quick, it's simple, it's easy. It won't get in your way too much, and you can easily change it if you change your mind about anything, either while you're planning, while you're writing, or after the fact. Basically, a beat sheet is a way of writing down everything that happens in the novel. Every little story element that you write, everything that happens, you just, write it as an outline in one single point per significant event. What I do personally, I plan it out scene by scene. Because I'm a big-time planner, and planning it out scene by scene means I always know what happens next. I always know the cause and effect of what happens to get the characters from point A to point B, either in the short term where it's in each chapter or in each act or even in the entire novel, how to get from the beginning, the status quo for the protagonist to the end. And if this works for you, you can do it in as close up or as zoomed out as possible. Whatever it is that specifically works for you. But again, I work scene by scene, and the big advantage to that is that I know through having written, a dozen books by now that my typical scene will have around 1,000 words in it. Some of them will have a lot less, some of them will have a lot more. But if I average out the scenes in every given book, it's about 1,000 words. So I can figure out, hey, 50,000 words, 1,000 words or so per scene. That means I need 50 scenes, which means I need 50 distinct points on my beat sheet. So I make a list of, 1 to 50, and then I just fill in the primary event of each scene. And for me, that means the primary conflict of each scene. Because to be effective, to me, a scene needs to have that primary conflict where your protagonist wants something and does not get it. So I need to know, I try to get the information across in each beat, who the protagonist is, in other words, who wants something in that scene, who the viewpoint character is, effectively, what it is they want, what the conflict is, what the opposition is, what they have to overcome to get it, and what happens when they don't get it, because they don't get what they want in any given scene, because if they did, the book would be over. Either they fail, or they succeed, but things don't go quite the way they want to. And this lets me know what the next scene is. And I can build a chain if I know I want certain big set pieces ahead of time. If during the brainstorming phase, if I know what cool scenes I want to have, I can figure out how I can get the characters to that sort of event. Say I'm writing a steampunk novel and I want there to be an airship crash. Well, this means I need to know how the characters get on the airship. So I come up with a sequence of scenes that lead the protagonist to the airship, and then foreshadowing as to why it crashes, everything else. Now, to help you organize these further, if you are so inclined, you can use an act structure. Now, for the most part, an act is just really any time the context of the story for either the protagonist or the reader changes, every time their understanding of what's going on, or if you want to think of it as a plot twist, the plot twist, every time things take a sudden different direction, that's a new act, right? Traditionally, there's a 3-act structure, which I'll go over in a second, but you can have any number of acts. You could have 5 acts, 7 acts, possibly 1 act if there are no twists, but that makes it a very difficult novel to actually write for a lot of reasons. The traditional first act structure, the traditional 3-act structure, and I usually use 4 for whatever reason, works like this. First act, you want to introduce all of your significant primary characters, all of your significant characters, all of your protagonists or co-tagonists. You want to hint at the antagonist at the very least. You want to get all the pieces on the board, all the major pieces. You can introduce minor characters later, but in your first act, which will be about 25% of your novel, or for NaNoWriMo, if we're aiming for 50,000 words, 12,500, or about, for me, 12 to 15 scenes. You'll want to get all of your pieces on the board. You'll want to establish what the status quo is. In other words, what world, what life does your character live in, your protagonist? And I don't mean world, what planet, but what is their reality? What is their context? Who do they hang out with? What is their job? What is their sense of reality? And you want to establish this for the reader. You want the reader to understand who the protagonist is to the degree where the story makes sense. And you want to do that as early as possible. And by the end of the first act, by, scene 15 or whatever, you want to have the protagonist making the choice that will drive them through the rest of the book. You want to have something have happened some dissatisfaction that they have or something they're reacting to that causes them to make an irrevocable choice to go in a new direction with their life. They have to turn their back on their status quo. They have to want something, and they have to have departed on a quest to get that want. And if it's a romance, maybe they've met a new person. If it's an adventure story, maybe they have to go kill a dragon. Whatever the particulars are for your book, at the end of the first act, they are ready to go. They are on their way. And they can't take that choice back. Maybe they didn't want to originally. Maybe they're reluctantly doing it, but they have set forth and they can't go back. I don't want to get all Joseph Campbell on them, but this is when they go from the ordinary world to the magical world. And the magic world isn't a literal magical world. It's just a context that they're not quite familiar with. The second act will be about half of your book. 50,000 words, it'll be 25,000 of them. It'll be about 25 scenes if you're going with a 50-scene beat sheet. So in this is all of the protagonist's attempts to solve their problems but failing to do so. And things will generally get worse and worse. That's a way to control the pacing a little bit, is by making things get worse and worse, faster and faster. If you're writing like sort of a thriller type book, that's what you sort of want to be doing. So in the second act, you want to basically have them reacting to whatever it is that's going on in your book, whatever the plot is, the protagonist is reacting to, until he gets to about the middle of it, at which point he'll start to stop reacting and start being more proactive as you drive towards the end of the second act, which is basically when they are ready for the end run, when they're ready to face the climax, when they have accomplished everything. And basically this will bring us to the third act, when they need to essentially have conquered their inner demons. They will often have become a new person, and their goal may have changed. I mean, in fact, that's the second to third act break, or in the middle of the second act, when they are pursuing something new, when they have rejected what they thought they wanted for what they actually do want, when they have grown as a person. Then the second act is basically doing all of the growing as a person. The first act is who they're growing from. The third act is who they have become. The second act is that transition point. So that's what we want to do in the second act. And the third act is you've set it all up. You don't want to introduce any new elements in the third act. All the pieces, even the minor pieces, have to be on the board. But the third act is basically the protagonist has set them off. The protagonist has been set up to be able to take action, to be able to make that fundamental choice to give up what they want for what they need, whatever the core of your book is, and they will either succeed or fail at doing so. You can write a book where they fail. Look at The Great Gatsby. He ends up floating upside down in the pool because he fails to grow and change and become a better person. Your book may not be about that. It may not be character-driven. It may not have a character arc that's defined. But ultimately, in this second act, or in the third act, they will either succeed or fail, and that will bring you to the end of the book. So that's it. That's 3-act structure. And again, feel free to come up with your own act structure. Please feel free to have more acts. But in general, the first act is where you set everything up. And the third act is where you knock everything down. And the second act is or the second, third, fourth, however many acts you have, is just the way to get from point A to point B and include all of the cool set pieces that your premise implies in your book. So that's it. That's structure. That's planning. And that's all there is to it. That's all it really is. And you can be as detailed, or as abstract as personally works for you. Experiment around, see what works for you. But you can do all of this before you start, paragraph 1, page 1, word 1. Get this done before NaNoWriMo, before the month, before November or April or July or whatever month you're doing it in, and you'll be good to go. You can just write straight through without having to stop to think about what's going on, without having to try and make decisions in the heat of your creative flow. Because the more you can string those words together, the more you can, stay in that just writing, literally typing, the faster you'll be and the better your writing will actually be. Next time we're going to talk about world building. This is another pre-writing thing you can do when you're deciding, about your setting and how to reveal that setting to your readers in an effective and interesting way. So if you like what you see, stick around. Next week, we'll talk about world building. Until then, have a good one. Keep writing.